Welcome back, everyone. So we're going to go up north for the second half of class. I want to move a little bit faster than the first half. At the High Renaissance, there's so much to say. I'll be honest, I left a lot on the table with some of those incredible works that we looked at. But that's the nature of this remote lecturing. We have to pick and choose. So let's go up north. And we have something very different happening there. We have a really important historical event, one of the most important historical events in the modern for modernity in the West, and that's the Protestant Reformation. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and then its effects on art making, and then we'll look at some, again, wonderful examples of artists in the Northern Renaissance. And that'll be our week. So you may have studied this in a history course, perhaps in high school, perhaps before, or already in college. So in 1517, you have a friar, a theologian named Martin Luther, who posts his 95 theses on the door of the Wittenberg Cathedral. Theses means points. There are some scholars who say that actually this didn't happen. I mean, he did write his 95 theses, but he may not have posted it to the door of the Wittenberg Cathedral. Whatever the case might be, his points had a far-reaching impact, a far-reaching cultural, theological, and political impact. It was huge. So, like I said, he was a friar. He was a theology teacher, and what he wanted to do with his points, with his 95 theses, was not to explode, to blow everything up. His point was to reform the church. So he saw certain things that were wrong with the church, and so basically the 95 theses are his complaints, and he wanted a correction to the teachings of the Catholic Church. Of course, as it happened, this text became incendiary, and it led to a split, a really profound split in Western Christianity. And so this is where we have the emergence of the split within the church between Protestants, which relatively speaking would be up in Northern Europe, and Catholics. So a split we still have today, a legacy in this country, and in Europe. So that's the beginning of the split within the Western Church. Of course, we have the Eastern Orthodox Church, which is something different, already a split within Christendom. But this is a split within the West itself between Protestants and Catholics. And so it's a really monumental moment, and there's some people that argue that calling it the Protestant Reformation is a misnomer, that this is not a reformation at all. It's not reform. This should be called the Protestant Revolution. It was a complete upheaval and revolutionary moment within what was then still a completely Christian worldview and politics. And so some of the things he decried would be the Pope. I mean, he was virulently against the Pope. He called the Pope the Antichrist. And he was against indulgences. Indulgences would be basically, let's say, a pay away your sin program. So if you were wealthy enough, if you were noble, you could give money, you can give a tribute to the church, to the Catholic Church, and then you would get an indulgence. So basically saying, your sins have been expurgated. So Luther found this to be wrong. He found this to be corrupt. And so we have an illustration by Lucas Cranach the Elder that sort of reinforces this point, this very Protestant point, and drives it home. Louis Cranach the Elder would be a key artist in the Northern Renaissance of this period. So we're in the 16th century. This is 1521, just 4 years after Luther posts his theses. And so we're already seeing these ideas coming of Luther, these ideas of the Reformation entering into visual culture, entering into visual arts. So Lucas Cranach had a book of drawings, where he would make comparisons. He would make analogies. And so on the left here, you have a depiction. This is an etching of Christ driving out the moneylenders. So this is a scene in the New Testament. This is the first time Christ goes to Jerusalem. One of the first things he does, he goes to the Temple of Solomon, and he turns over all the money changers. He liberates all the animals that are in cages that are there to be bought by exchanging money so that they can be sacrificed in the temple. So he's basically, in some ways, sort of, he thinks he's cleansing the religion from these unnecessary sacrifices and from this sort of corrupt system of money lending and money changing that would be outside the temple. So this is a scene from Scripture. This is a scene from the New Testament. And so this is the side of Christ. This is the sign of for Lucas Cranach the Elder, and for Luther and for Protestants, this is a good story. This is a story of virtue. Cranach the Elder then makes an analogy with the present day. And notice you have Antichrist written up here. And the Antichrist is the Pope himself. I know that might sound bizarre, but this is Luther thought the Pope and the Catholic Church had corrupted religion, had corrupted Christianity, and so he considers the Pope the Antichrist, or calls him the Antichrist. And so we have a scene of indulgences being sold. So you have people here giving money, and the Pope writing the indulgences, basically saying, you can pay away your sins. And then we have this little dog right in the front, sort of looking at us, which I've always liked that little detail. And so the analogy becomes clear. We have a reversal. We have in Scripture, we have Christ sending away this sort of economic system that cropped up around religious ritual. And now there's a reemergence of it within the religion itself, of this economic system that's become standardized in Luther's day. So it's a good example of visual culture already dealing with these Protestant themes. The other major development during this period, and it actually happens in the 15th century, but it really explodes in the 16th century, is the invention of movable type, of the Gutenberg press. And so this is really revolutionary. There's all sorts of people have written about this, all sorts of scholarship about this, how this was the first information revolution. Because think about it. Now before this, you had monks in scriptoriums it would take forever to copy one Bible or to copy a text of some kind, right? And then that copy, because it's so laborious and labor intensive, it would be expensive. It would be a luxury item, right? So only very select few people could have them, and there would be limits as to how many could be made. Once you have the invention of the movable printing press, a movable type, all of a sudden now you can churn out copies, you can churn out pamphlets, you can churn out the 95 Theses that Luther posts to the Wittenberg Cathedral. So it disseminates, it goes, and it travels far and wide in a way that writing could not have before this period. And so this is really important, because if you have the beginning of this dissatisfaction with the church and you have this message coming out, that message catches fire through the development of printing press and through the dissemination of pamphlets and now books that are able to be printed more quickly and in larger number. So if today we talk about what we've lived through in the latter we didn't live through it, but the latter part of the 20th century into our own time, the second information revolution, which is based on digital dissemination, digital traffic and copying and so on and so forth, which takes us to a whole other level. This would be the first information revolution. The first information revolution where ideas can go viral in the way we talk about it today. Of course, not through hypertext, not through a digital medium, but through print medium. What we now consider to be an older medium. But back then, this was cutting edge and revolutionary and really, really important for the dissemination of knowledge, the dissemination of information, and also for literacy. And so it's no coincidence that Martin Luther in 1534 he translates the Bible, which can now be printed more. And this is the first. This is a depiction of Luther's Bible. And just as importantly as the medium of movable type in the printing press, this is the first German translation of the Bible. This is the first translation of the Bible in vernacular. Vernacular means the language that's spoken by everyday common people. So before this, the New Testament and the Old Testament are written in older language, Aramaic, some in Greek, then translated into Latin, right? So mostly Bibles would be written in Latin, and normal everyday people would have to rely on the priest or a cardinal or the pope to interpret it for them, to quite literally read it for them. And so people needed a middleman for the Word of God, for Christians, right? Now, if people can go and read it directly in their own language, which is what Martin Luther makes available, all of a sudden, you don't need the priest, you don't need the pope, you don't need that middle conduit. You can go straight to the Word of God for Christians, right? And so this is a key move in the Protestant Reformation, this idea that you don't need the church, you don't need these saints, you don't need these cardinals, you don't need these priests. You can commune directly with God through the Word, through the text itself. So this, as a gesture, as a historical gesture, this itself is Protestant. This abides by Luther's wish to sort of derobe and get rid of all the bells and whistles of the church and go straight towards the content of the Scripture. So all these events, the theses, the printing press, and translation to the vernacular, all these are momentous moments in culture that have impact on society, have impact on politics, and we've already seen will have impact on art making. And so we cut straight to the impact on art making here when we note another moment of iconoclasm. So you remember back when we were talking about Byzantine art, this important moment, somewhat notorious moment of iconoclasm where all these Byzantine icons were destroyed. We have another wave of it here in the Protestant North. So while Lutherans, people who abided by Luther's teaching, would accept certain forms of art as educational, other Protestant sects, so during the Protestant Reformation, along the course of the 16th century, you had offshoots. So you have Calvinists in modern-day Switzerland, you have Huguenots in modern-day France, and some of these offshoots of Protestantism were more stridently against visual production, were more against art. And they were really, in some ways, against anything other than the written word, than Scripture itself. They considered everything else to be, in some ways, too seductive, a deviation, or too distracting from the teaching itself, from the religion itself. And so what you had in the 16th century would be rampant moments of rampant iconoclasm. So people, this is Hans Hogensberg, not nearly as famous as Lucas Cranach the Elder, showing a depiction of iconoclasm happening in Antwerp, circa 1570. So people coming to the Antwerp Cathedral, destroying everything that has an image. So you've noticed they're destroying statues, they're breaking into stained glass. Calvinists also would take axes to church organs, so even music was deemed to be too seductive. And so you're sort of stripping away all the ornamentation, all the visual culture that was part of the religion, that was part of the service, tapping into this long anxiety about reproductions in religion, all right? Engraven images, and that whole discourse that we've talked about already in this class that has to do with iconoclasm. It's funny enough that you also have looters here, people coming out with food and wine from the church. So it's hard to know when this was pure iconoclasm and other parts where it was kind of looting to get some goodies. So this is a pretty illustrative print about what was happening here. And at the time, the Ghent Altarpiece was in Antwerp, if I'm remembering correctly. Don't quote me on this. We'd have to go back and do the research here, because this is just coming off the top of my head. And just at the last moment, it had to be saved. And so we talked about Jan van Eyck's Ghent Altarpiece a few weeks back, how the Nazis in World War II loved this work, and they stole it. So it's been through quite a bit. It was just barely saved in the 16th century. And so who were some of the key artists during this moment and these upheavals, these religious upheavals that have to do with the Protestant Reformation? Probably the most well-known and one of the most important artists of the 16th century will be Albrecht Durer. And Durer is the first artist, actually there are a number of firsts with Durer. Durer is the first artist to become really, really famous in his own time. And not only famous, let's say, in his own country or in his own geography, but actually Europe-wide, okay? A lot of people knew Durer. He became very, very popular. And it's not so much because of his paintings, although there are incredible paintings, and this is his self-portrait from 1500. It's more about his prints. And again, the printing press and the use of prints changed the economy of art, because now here you have an artist who, think about it, if you make a beautiful painting, you can sell it once, and that's it, right? And then it's in the hands of whoever bought it. But if you make a very popular print, you can sell it. You sell it more cheaply than you would a painting, but you can sell it as many times as you want, right? You can make as many copies as you want. So it's not so much Durer's paintings that made him famous, although they're important. It was by and large his prints that were super, super popular during this time. So I'll show you some of his prints in a moment. He's also the first artist to use his own monogram. So when you see an A with a D, this is almost like, I think I know Kyrie Irving's shoes, or like, athletes who have their own monograms on their Nike contracts or whatever sports contracts that they have. This is a similar thing. So 1500, and you have the AD. So this is not Anthony Davis, this is Albrecht Durer, right? So he has his own, in some ways, brand. And we know that there was a copyright lawsuit. He's the first person in history to sue someone for using an image of his. So he has this he was a very astute painter, but also an astute businessman. And here he is, almost looking like Christ. Often people look at this self-portrait and they think, well, he has this Christ-like look, which wouldn't be in any way sacrilegious. He depicts himself as Christ because Christ is someone, for Christians, especially at this time, someone to emulate. And he's looking right at you. He's wearing his finest. He's he's got this fur trim. He's kind of holding it. He has this emphasis with his hand, sort of holding the fur. And a lot of art historians read this, that he's giving you what an artist is, which is a mind, this piercing gaze, like this intelligence, but also this hand that can make great things with a paintbrush or with a pencil, or with a print, right? So this self-portrait seems to say something about his conception of what an artist is, and it's certainly becoming a self-important conception of the artist. The artist is becoming really important, and again, he was very, very famous and well known in his time. So probably one of the most popular set of prints that he published was Apocalypse with Pictures from 1498. Which is a set of woodblock prints. Woodblock is made, it's almost like a stamp. So imagine you have a piece of wood and you make a picture with the wood, so you have grooves, right? So that would be the negative space of the picture. Then you ink it and then you press it as you would a stamp, right? So in some ways it's the simplest, most rudimentary form of printmaking. And then this is the cover of the Apocalypse. And you have a number of scenes. It goes through the book of Revelation, the last book of the New Testament, where the world for Christians comes to an end. You have the second coming, you have the Four Horsemen and everything. And speaking of the Four Horsemen, here they are. This is probably the most well-known page in this Apocalypse with Pictures from Durer. And you have the Four Horsemen. I forget the names. You have death. You have pestilence. You have all four horsemen signify something. You have the Pope down here. Here's the Pope. He has his hat, and he's been thrown to the ground. He's about to be eaten by this demon lion sort of creature. So that tells you that these ideas, these anti-papal ideas, these Protestant ideas, are already happening years before Luther's official posting of his 95 points in 1517. So this was incredibly popular. Another very popular work of his, which was a print, and this was an engraving, is his Fall of Man, his depiction of Adam and Eve in Eden. So an engraving is a little different than a woodblock. An engraving would usually be on a copper plate, and you would etch a drawing, like you would have for those who practice, who have done printmaking will know this. You'll have a pointy instrument where you make the design, where you make the drawing. It gets ink, but the ink in this instance gets into the grooves and into the drawing itself, so that what is not drawn, then the ink gets wiped away and it gets pressed through pressure through a press, so that the paper then touches the ink inside the lines of the drawing, and then that's how you have the engraving. And so it affords a lot higher level of detail than a woodblock print. You can get much finer and you can do much more shading. So at first you might think this was just a really wonderful drawing, just a straight drawing, but no, it's in fact a drawing mediated by this copper plate, mediated by the technique of engraving. And this is probably Durer's most famous print, even more famous than the Four Horsemen. So you have Adam on the left here with the judicious fig leaf covering him. Same thing with Eve on the right. Same thing with a branch. They're in Eden. You don't yet have the fall, but it's just about there. So just like the Sistine Chapel that we saw in the first half today, here you have the Tree of Knowledge, which notice how much more in the north, how much more naturalistic everything is. This looks just really like a tree, like a forest, and then like cliffs and stuff on the background. So he's as interested in the natural world as he is in the figures and the story being told. So it's different from Michelangelo. So you have the serpent, you have the forbidden fruit, and so those are the characters. You also have these animals throughout the print, and they're not just there willy-nilly. The animals actually mean something. Oh yeah, I'm sorry. This is the first point I wanted to make. Notice, even though Durer is up north, and he never actually travels to Italy, he does see copies of important Greek works. This is the Apollo Belvedere, a famous Greek statue, a Roman copy of a Greek statue. And we're pretty sure that he modeled his Adam after this very famous Greek statue. So Durer's up north, but he's also tapping into these new Renaissance ideas, these new Renaissance sensibilities of marrying Christian theology with Roman visual culture. So the Renaissance, again, I'm harping this over and over again, is a rebirth of classical Greece. So we see almost a one-to-one correspondence between his Adam, who definitely looks more like a Greek athlete or hero or god than he does someone from the way you might think Adam would look like in a non-Greek context. So back to the animals. The animals aren't there willy-nilly. They actually mean something. They're symbolic of something. So you have the cat up here. You have the rabbit. You have the elk. And then you have the ox, and these four animals all mean something. They're all conditioned by a very old, pre-scientific, pre-modern medical understanding of the body. So it was once thought that we had these fluids in our body that are called humors. They're each different colors. There's black, there's yellow, there's red, and what was the other one? I forget. There's another color. And these humors each designate a certain mood, a certain psychology. So the humor that the cat represents is the choleric humor. Choleric means anger, like someone who's a hothead who gets angry really easily. They're choleric. The rabbit is sanguine. Sanguine means friendly. So someone who's sanguine is someone who's very friendly, and then maybe even there might even be like frisky sort of sexual connotations to this. Ox would be phlegmatic. These are good GRE or LSAT words, and if one day you have to take one of these crazy entrance tests to graduate school or law school or whatever, medical school, they're going to test your vocabulary, and so it's nice to have a broad vocabulary of words that you probably would never use in everyday life. So choleric, sanguine is good. Phlegmatic is good. Phlegmatic means you're lazy. You just don't really want to do anything. You have no energy. So the ox represents laziness, and there he is, just lying down, fittingly enough. Then the elk is melancholy. Melancholic means depressed, sad, dark, brooding. So the elk represents that. So these are not just willy-nilly four animals that are in this forest with Adam and Eve. They represent this old medical knowledge, which of course has turned out to be wrong, or at least a fiction, or trying to account for our different psychological states, because we get angry, we get sad, we get depressed, and we certainly get lazy. We all do. And the way it ties into Eden is that it was thought that before the fall, all our humors were in sync. Like nothing was out of whack. So everything was in perfect balance. And it's only after the fall where our humors go out of whack. So like our cat humor goes out of whack, and we have anger. Our elk humor goes out of whack, and we get depressed, and so on and so forth. So this medical knowledge, this pre-modern, pre-scientific medical knowledge, in fact relates directly to this story of Adam and Eve in the garden. There are a couple other little details which I like. All the way in the back, you notice that's like a ram, a mountain goat or something like that perched up there. Maybe is representing the story of the sacrifice of Abraham and Isaac. Maybe that can double as Mount Moriah up there. And then you also have, on the left here, you have a parrot. Just next to Adam's head, it's perched, I think in sort of this comic, sort of insightful way. Durer's done this on purpose. Right above this sign that has his signature. So he's signing, and he's saying that he made this in 1504. And there are some that read the parrot as a way to try to get out of appearing sacrilegious. Because, of course, if the artist says he made this, a very fervent Christian would say, no, you didn't make this. This is Eden, this is Adam, this is Eve. God made this, right? So getting back to these ideas of images as cutting too close, of dangerously becoming sacrilegious and iconoclastic. So maybe he put the parrot there as a way of saying, I made this, but I only made it in the way that like parrots only parrot, only mimic what they hear. So they're not really speaking, I didn't really make this, this is only a copy, I'm only parroting the divine creation, right? So maybe he put that in there as a slight little joke that sort of wards off accusations of being in some way sacrilegious. Incidentally, if we're talking about pre-scientific knowledge, we now know that parrots actually don't parrot. Parrots, when they speak, parrots are one of the rare non-human animals that can use human speech. And look up Alex the parrot. He was a very famous parrot that was worked, an ethologist named Pepperdine worked with this parrot for 30 years, almost 30 years, and found that actually parrots knew what they were saying when they were using our language. So they basically have the language skills of a 6-year-old child or something like that. So they're not, parrots, funny enough, are not actually parroting. And Durer is also well known for representing nature really beautifully, as we talked about here, and all these animals in his paintings. I think you guys all know that one of my specialties is animals in art history, which is why sometimes they recur even in my introductory class. So I wanted to show you his young hare, which is a really beautiful watercolor that he did. And it's a depiction of an animal that really you're just getting the animal as you would get the animal in nature. There's no caricature, there's no symbolism, there are no tropes. This is just a very simple, humble young hare, which is a rabbit. And again, 1502 with the monogram of Albrecht Durer right underneath. So I wanted to show you that work. There's another really fascinating artist of this time period, Hieronymus Bosch, and he's a very mysterious artist. There's not that much known about him, but this is one of his most famous works, one of his most well-known works. And when I open it up, this is an altarpiece, so it's closed right now. So you're seeing the outside of it. When I open it up, you'll probably say, "Oh, I've seen that before." It's a very famous image. But I show it closed first, because it's kind of a fascinating image. This is God up on a cloud, and this is him on the third day. So this is like Michelangelo, although much more involved. This is a depiction of the creation, but he has just separated the land from water, and so you're getting a depiction of the earth. Weirdly enough, both as round and flat. Clouds, sea, land. You're getting the initial formation of Earth, of the world, on the outside of this panel. So it's a really ambitious depiction. He's trying to show the whole thing, whereas Michelangelo just kind of teased what that might look like by simply showing God twirling around in the sky and kind of separating things with his hands. Bosch is showing you the whole thing. And so that's on the outside. On the inside, so this is the comparison with Michelangelo. This is the separating land from sea. So you're really only getting it obliquely. Hieronymus Bosch is ambitiously trying to show you the whole dang thing. And so if I open it up now, these are the two panels, right? That swivel open. You get this scene, very different from the outside. And this is the Garden of Earthly Delights that has fascinated and perplexed viewers ever since. Scholars today are still debating as to what it all means. And so let's go from left to right to try to figure it out for ourselves. So this is a depiction of a strange landscape with these weird formations, weird vegetation, and all these different animals. Some coming out of this massive hole here. This one especially is mysterious. This strange, like monkey amphibian thing coming out of the ground. So normally this is then read as God presenting Eve to Adam. Adam, who's weirdly just kind of sitting here in this position. A lot of times this is thought to then be Eden, a depiction of Eden, but what's weird is that there's really no tree of knowledge. This is not the tree of knowledge, neither is this. You basically have Adam and Eve, and then all these animals. And the other way it doesn't seem to be Eden is that there's actual death happening. So you have this cat with a mouse in his mouth. You have a bird with, like, I don't know if this is a cricket or a frog or something like that. So you do have, like, creatures eating each other, and it's well known that in Eden there was no killing. All animals were basically herbivorous, got things from trees and so on and so forth. So there was no killing yet before sin, before the fall. So if this is a depiction of Eden, it's actually wrong or just weird, right? Then in the center, and I have the detail for you, these creatures coming out. What is this hole? Very strange, right? Then in the center, you have just this teeming mass of people, all of them naked, but they have no shame. And they're doing various strange things, like having fun with animals, humping fruit. Like this figure here, like, seems to be straddling this big strawberry, eating it. Like there's a fish on the ground that's being caressed. This guy, and this is like a big blueberry. Here's a big blackberry. So these people just frolicking, having a whole bunch of eyes wide shut kind of fun. This person spanking someone else who seems to have flowers coming out of their behind. Very, very peculiar, strange imagery. And so we can pull back a second here and say, do we think this was destined for a church? Definitely not. Definitely not. This was for a private patron. And in fact, if we go back to the context of the Protestant Reformation, once you have this this religious upheaval, once you have Lutherans and especially Calvinists who say art has no business in religion, art has no business in a church, all of a sudden there are a lot of commissions that dry up for artists, right? This is a challenging moment for visual production. And so you have a lot more private commissions. And so a private work like this, which a collector would have in his home, it would be a conversation piece, it would be something that people would talk about and look at, would be a very different viewing context than a public altarpiece. What's great is that it now affords a whole different set of themes and different possibilities that otherwise would be impossible, including all this crazy business that you're seeing in the middle panel. And then on the right, the furthest panel, this one we do kind of understand what it is, and it's a depiction of hell. So you have this blasted out landscape, you have all these strange creatures doing all these strange things. So this bird eating a man. We know, actually, if I go one further here, that Bosch also did a 7 Deadly Sins. This is actually a round table that was owned by the King of Spain. It was Philip. So it was a table. It was a painting to be meant at a table where you could go in and you would study and look at all the 7 deadly sins. So all the 7 deadly sins are wrath, envy, greed, gluttony, sloth, lust, and pride. So Bosch has given a scene representing each type of deadly sin for Christians. And with that context in mind, we can go back and look at hell, and we notice that these are people who are now in hell, who are punished for their sins. And so it's as if their punishment is specific to their to the thing that they've done wrong. So notice this person here, you can only see like their legs and their behind. They seem to be defecating gold coins. So this person was probably greedy. This woman is in front of this strange creature with a mirror, and so for all eternity she's destined to kind of like look at herself. So she was probably prideful. Think of like someone who is constantly just taking selfies of themselves. She's prideful. This person is this is maybe the most bizarre passage, being sort of molested by a pig in a nun's dress. So this person was probably had a bit too much lust. All sorts of things. And like you have this rabbit who's stringing up this human. So a reversal. The hunter is now the one who's being hunted by his prey. All of these images in hell can in some ways be reduced back to the 7 deadly sins. And so when we put it all together, what does it all mean? So we have this non-Eden, this place that actually is not Eden. We have this place that seems to be part of Eden. This is not Eden, because look, this part of the altarpiece, seems to be contiguous. So some people have read this to be the people of the east of Eden, the descendants of Adam and Eve. But if so, why are they doing all these strange things? And then we have hell, right? So I don't want to spend too much time because I've read a lot about this, and there are all sorts of different interpretations of this very enigmatic work. In class, it's always so fun to sort of throw this open and have people try to guess, try to come up with their own interpretations of what this means. And oftentimes students have all these great guesses, these great interpretations, many of which I hadn't thought of, and scholars hadn't thought of. So this is a really fun painting to talk about. And again, this would have been probably its purpose in a private setting. This would be something that a wealthy person would have owned, and you have right before dinner, you would have your drink and you would talk about this painting with friends. One of the most I think one of the most compelling interpretations, I'm only going to give you one, is by Hans Belting, a really eminent German art historian. And he talks about this. He says, what if this painting is a speculative painting of what the Christian world would look like if original sin never happened? So that would explain why there's no tree of knowledge, there's no serpent, there's no Satan. That would explain why there's just killing. That would explain why all these people here are doing all these crazy things, giving in to all pleasures, all temptations. This does look like a big fruit-filled orgy. If you have a world without original sin, a world without sin, then everything is possible. All is permissive. Dostoevsky, later on in the 19th century, in Brothers Karamazov, there's a very famous quote in there where he says, "Without God, everything is possible." So maybe Bosch is showing you a depiction, a cautionary tale about what, for Christians, a world would look like without sin. It would just be this crazy free-for-all, right? Now, to avoid, because maybe some of us would be like, oh, well, this sounds like a blast. I would love to be just frolicking, right? I would love to be having fun with fruit and all sorts of other people, right? And big giant birds. I'm not so sure about that, actually. But maybe some people would think, this would be great to live without any sense of morality, any sense of sin. Bosch has sort of undercut that, because notice, without original sin, there is no depiction of heaven, but there is a depiction of hell. So even without sin, it looks like the last stop, the last destination, nonetheless, will be this sort of horrible landscape where people get punished for their sins, even though they didn't have any connotation of it during their life. So maybe that's a compelling. I don't think it works 100%, but I think it's a compelling interpretation that this was a cautionary tale about life without sin. And so sin is something that people, pious Christians in the 16th century, should be thinking about. So a really fun painting to talk about. And then in a similar vein, this is our last example for today. We go to a German artist. There's no Germany yet. This is the Holy Roman Empire. He's actually living in England, working as a court painter to the English king. This is Hans Holbein the Younger. This is a painting called The French Ambassadors. And I'd never been to London until last year. And this is in London. It's a really incredible painting to see in person. It's almost like all paintings, they're not done justice on a PowerPoint. But this one especially, because there's a specific feature that you really need to see this in person to be able to decode, to experience fully. But first, so what are we seeing? These are two French ambassadors. This is a very important French cleric who's visiting the English court, and this is a nobleman visiting the court. And these are two Renaissance humanists. So they've come with all the bells and whistles of what Renaissance humanists have: scientific instruments, musical instruments, astronomical instruments, everything that they have, including like a globe. There's a hymn book, Luther's hymn book, a set of song, and here's a lute, so an early guitar-like instrument. And notice the detail in this is incredible. There's one little string that's popped here, and there's some interpretations of this painting that say this is very important. This chord that's been broken. So remember that. We're going to get back to that in a second. So this is a detail of this table that shows all of their stuff, right? So it's an incredibly lavish, incredibly detailed painting of these two Renaissance humanists. But then he's added this really strange shape at the bottom here. So look at this incredible floor, this incredible marble floor. Then there's this shape that's jutting from the left up to the top. Maybe you can already tell what it is. It's called an anamorphic image. An anamorphic image is an image that's made that you can't really see what it is up front. You have to be at a certain angle. Or you can use a mirror or a specific device to see it correctly. So this anamorphic image, when you're looking at it from the left or from the front, you can't really quite tell what it is. But an amazing thing happens when you move to the right side of the painting, and you look at it from relief from the right side. Then it sort of forms itself in your eye, and you can tell that it's a skull. So there's this skull that's been placed, that Holbein's placed, right on the floor. They don't seem to be aware of it. So this skull, and remember when we talked about Masaccio, remember that skeleton? This skull definitely is functioning in the same way. It's a memento mori. It's a reminder of death. It's a reminder to be pious. And that's especially poignant in this image because they're wearing their best. They have all these instruments of scientific knowledge, of humanist knowledge. And so maybe Holbein is saying, don't forget that none of this stuff will help you when you die. And you got to remember that the most important thing in life for a Christian is God, is salvation, is worrying about your personal reckoning, right? So this functions as a memento mori. What's interesting is that they don't seem to be aware of it at all. It's almost as if it exists on a different plane of existence, right? So that's even more of a cautionary tale here. It seems as if they're oblivious, right? And so this gets back to the idea of, there's one more little detail here on the top left. You can't tell from here, but can you see what is peeking behind the curtain? Artists don't make accidents. Even these little details are not coincidental. This is a crucifix, right? As if the crucifix is in the least important position of the painting and partially hidden from view. So that's working with the skeleton as this memento mori. And remember that lute, the string that was broken. There's some people that read all three of these things together. The crucifix that's almost hidden from view, the skull that seems to exist on a different plane, and then the cord, the broken cord. People literally will say that this maybe represents the discord in the religion at the time. So not only the split of the Protestant Reformation, like there's discord in Europe and it's going to lead to horrible religious wars, but also maybe we're seeing the seeds of the split between human knowledge and divine truth, divine knowledge. This is going to come full force in the Enlightenment 2 centuries after this, right? So we're still in a moment where a Renaissance humanist will be fully religious, but also be interested in human knowledge. There's not yet an understanding that maybe human knowledge is actually going to start undercutting divine knowledge, which it already had. I mean, think of this. This is around the time we're about 100 years away from Copernicus and Galileo, where they're going to find out definitively that the Earth is not the center of creation. That's a big issue for the existing theological worldview. That of course the creation would be that the Earth and humans would be the center of creation. That's a big issue. So maybe Holbein has put these little symbols in here to already signal the way forward, where we are going to have a split between scientific knowledge, human knowledge, and divine truths, which during the Renaissance were still cohabitating without any issue. So this is a signpost for what we're going to be talking about, I think already next week when we get to the Enlightenment and scientific revolutions and philosophical political upheavals. Okay, everybody. So that's it for this week. I'm looking forward to reading your worksheet responses, and please stay safe out there. Talk to you next week.